University, social media, citizen journalism and media in Asia. We also have Noel Debian, who is a religion specialist at the ABC, which is how I've gotten to know him almost over a decade now.
It's been a long time.
I know. So he has been with the National Broadcaster's Religion Unit since 1996 and has worked across a range of programs, including the ABC TV as producer and director on programs like Compass, also in radio as producer and presenter for programs including one of my favourites, the Religion and Ethics Report, The Spirit of Things, which we miss, and Life Matters. Noel is well experienced in online print and, of course, religion journalism. And to Noel's right, we have Professor Monica Attard, who is the head of journalism at the University of Technology, Sydney, and serves on an advisory board for Media Diversity Australia. She spent 28 years at the ABC, working across radio and television, and has received 5 Walkley Awards, including gold, for her contributions. Many of you might remember Monica while she was the ABC's Russia correspondent, possibly one of the most momentous periods in Russia's modern history. She's also received an Order of Australia for her services to journalism. So I'm sure you'll agree with me that we are in fine company today with a strong breadth of experience to draw from as we traverse our questions during today's discussion. A lot of you have been asking, what can we change? How can we move forward? And perhaps one of the most potent forces which act on perceptions and understanding in the public sphere is, of course, the media. And this is why this part of the conversation is so crucial and vital to today's program, alongside all the other streams of content that we're exploring and examining. I might be biased, but I was thinking about how to best encapsulate the significance of the media to this conversation and to public discourse broadly. And I could not help but draw from the Baha'i writings, the writings of Baha'u'llah, who has described the media as an amazing and potent phenomenon and likened it to a mirror, endowed with hearing, sight, and speech. Baha'u'llah says that the media has the capacity to both reflect and make known the deeds and the pursuits of the diverse peoples. So it's in this context that we now seek to deeply examine the implications of the media in contributing towards this essential conversation in our country as we strive towards greater social cohesion and inclusion. So I will now move over and join our 3 panellists and speak through some questions, and then later invite you to ask some of your own.
Okay, I've got a time.
So, can you hear me? Yes, good. I was thinking perhaps it might be helpful to examine this conversation at quite a high level first, at a higher level, and then go down more deeper into some of the more particular questions as it relates to the role of the media. So as I mentioned, Dr. Rodriguez has done a lot of research and has written a number of reports about this topic. And just this year, she published one of her reports was about representation of news related to culturally diverse populations in Australian media, and was written in conjunction with Michael Neiman and Yin Pardis. And in this report, it's quoted that conversations around strategies to enhance social cohesion are often inhibited by the perceived role of the media. So what is the current perception of the role of the media around social cohesion, and how accurate is it?
Good afternoon.
Don't point it at all.
Is it on?
No. Switch it on.
No, it's on. Okay. Well, okay, let me start with the research first. So we basically wanted to look at, everyone basically hates the media. Well, you don't do a good job, you don't represent the community that we live in. But then this is all anecdotal. They are lived experiences, but anecdotal. So as a researcher, and also as an ex-journalist, basically I wish to find out, okay, is this really true? So that means we do need to do research. And in fact, we are doing research with Media Diversity Australia as well. So this report basically comes from that. So we did audience survey, we did content analysis, and we specifically looked at some of the issues that impacted on multicultural Australia. And we found certain things. And to some extent, that comment that I have included, it kind of alludes to that, which is of the 1,300, 1,400 news stories that we looked at, and these were specifically contentious issues, it seemed like that the reporters, they reported most of them, 2/3 of them were reported either just by them or by speaking to a government source. But they never went to another source. So for example, when you have a story like Sudanese gang, most of these stories are just reported by reporters.
Sudanese.
Yeah. Or they probably once in a while spoke with a politician to add comment. But they never, I mean, it's only about 25% of the overall stories that we actually looked at, they actually asked someone else to comment on that event. And that's where I basically, when I wrote that comment, it seems like that the mainstream media seems to be thinking, there are lots of different medias, we already know commercial and public service broadcasting and others. But it seems that there seems to be this perception that, okay, mainstream media is about go and cover current issues and current events and just present them as is. So when you speak to journalists, they say, what's wrong with this? Because one, they are not following their own basic education that we have tried to give them, that is, present a fair and balanced story, which means you need to speak to at least 2 people. Minimum. Right? They don't. They says, we are too busy. We can't reach people. And a variety of things. So I said, okay, fine, you have to cover this event, we are in the social media age, so you need to cover it now. Fine. What about later? Do you have the time to go and follow up on that story? Do you have time to go and find out, okay, what is the community thing? What is the other side of the story? So the answer to that is, oh, well, the long-form stories about Sudanese gang, SBS can do it. Maybe ABC can do it. But we need to be edgy. We cannot do slow and boring stories. So what I was trying to say is there is this issue of, self-perception of what mainstream media should look like. It's like you do need to, the role of journalism is not just, you have cornered the power to be able to speak to society as a mirror. In that case, you get the power to ask questions, but that also gives you then the power to create what's called, community well-being. You need to create social cohesion, which means you don't just cover news events and issues as they happen, you cover other stories as well. You cover stories which are a bit more positive maybe, or which provide more context to when the events happen. So that's where that comment is coming from.
I think I've seen some nudges from Monica Knowles. Monica, did you want to add or offer anything in addition to that?
Well, I think Usha is correct. I mean, there are enormous pressures on journalists these days because they're producing 24/7. But I think the bigger problem is that they actually don't know people in the communities that they're reporting on. And they don't know them because the media is made up, by and large of white Anglo practitioners. And that's a problem that we've identified at Media Diversity Australia. That's why we set it up. It's something that we're trying to address. We also welcome gratefully the ABC's attempts to widen the base of sources that journalists and reporters can actually go to by identifying members of individual and specific communities. But, I mean, just to your point, I mean, it's about, you know, the issue of the way journalists perceive themselves. I mean, I think journalists perceive themselves as contributing to a higher civic discourse, but that's centred around truth-telling and transparency, holding people to account. And that's not often, and sometimes can't be reconciled with achieving higher civic purpose. And there are other factors as well. So, for example, we can't ignore the fact that some sectors of the media are ideologically driven. There's just there's no arguing about that. And that, and to put it mildly, and so, you know, you see, you know, largely negative reporting about some communities, which is really distressing. There's similarly nothing particularly higher purpose about some of the reporting that targets particular communities. You mentioned the Sudanese of Victoria. Those particular communities of people have found themselves hounded upon, misrepresented, and there's nothing that they can do to fight back because they are not on the list of people who journalists would normally go to seek comment from. I think really at the end of the day, the real question here is whether there's anything in the codes of conduct by which journalists claim they live, and I use the word advisedly, but is there anything in the code of conduct by which journalists claim to live which compels them to perform their jobs in the pursuit of some higher civic purpose? And would that at the end of the day, I don't think there is, by the way, and would that at the end of the day include situations where we selectively report in order to protect people or communities of people? You know, I think the way journalists perceive their roles depends on many things. It depends on who they are, where they work, what the demands of their proprietors or employees are, and at the end of the day, what they can live with as individuals. I honestly do not know how some journalists sleep at night reporting some of the stories that they've reported. One of them was just last week with the terrible story about the young woman, 23 years old, who was in a relationship with an older magistrate who ended up reportedly committing suicide, was not determined yet. But that's a terrible story. That's a real indictment of our industry and what we do, that we could have hounded on her the way some media outlets did for commercial purposes.
I just wanted to add the sample that we had collected, unfortunately, also included ABC and SBS. So the comment I made includes ABC and SBS, unfortunately, which basically means that even though ABC has a different charter, and they are doing a few things around trying to diversify their newsrooms, still their stories had the same pattern, which was quite disappointing to find.
I will buy on just briefly on that. When you talk about the ABC, it's a complicated animal, and there's different parts of it. So the news division is one thing, local radio is another thing, specialist groups like the religion and ethics unit are another thing, and they don't all do exactly the same thing. So I'd be very interested to drill down into this research to find out exactly what it says. And there is proactively currently within the ABC a diversity policy in place. Now, what that produces might be another thing, but there is a policy in place to say that unless ABC presenters are not all Anglo-Saxon like me, well, Anglo-Gaelic really, but anyway, the point is, if you don't have a variety of people inside, and that includes religious people, we often have interns in Compass and religious, and we say to them, look, you're a Sydney Anglican, or you're a Baha'i, or you're a Jew. If you don't actually take up the practice and the profession, you're not there to advocate for your cause, by the way, you're not there to do Baha'i or Catholic work, but you actually have knowledge. And therefore, if there is not a spread of knowledge within those practitioners, as well as a diversity of race, you've already got a problem. For example, recently I saw going on news, on our networks actually, there was a story going on about marriage of clergy. And the news was running footage And they had footage of the Anglican Archbishop of Sydney as they were talking about how Catholic priests are not allowed to marry, Catholic bishops are not allowed. I thought, Mrs. Davis would be fascinated to watch this, really. And that happened. I was able to intervene and say, you've got the wrong footage, you know, it was fixed. But it was because that newsroom just didn't know the difference between an Anglican bishop and a Catholic one, you know. Very simple mistake to make. It's a religious person. And so that basis of knowledge is sometimes missing when you lack the diversity. That's what I'd say about it. We do have a policy, and I'll be interested to read your research more.
You know, one of the things that really worries me, though, is that we talk about diversity. We've been talking about it for years now. It was first ushered in by Michelle Guthrie,
yes,
famously. But we've dropped the ball. I mean, we still are nowhere near achieving it. Our newsrooms are startlingly white and non-diverse. And I know as an educator, having been in the sector that I'm in now for in excess of 5 years overall, that it's really difficult to get kids who aren't white Anglo kids placed in jobs. It's actually really hard. And I don't know why that is, because these are kids who ought to be given a go, who are bright, who can make it, who have got all the hallmarks of being very, very good journalists, who know their communities, who are prepared to report on them critically, not just glowingly, but critically, but who aren't being given a chance. So with the latest ABC push, and Noel is absolutely right, you know, the ABC is not one homogeneous entity. I mean, it is made up of various units, and they all perform differently, and they all have different rules, regulations, and internal cultures. You know, we're in a new phase now where the ABC has just dropped a report on diversity. Let's see where that goes. Let's hope that it makes a difference. But perhaps I'm feeling quite jaded, but I'm sceptical.
Okay. So,
hold it. You might be.
So we know diversity has a role to play, but I want to also explore the context of community engagement, because I think really that's been such a hallmark of your journalism, Noel, when it comes to really engaging with community groups. And you've been in this for over 20 years. You love being engaged in community groups.
Sure. What
role does this type of engagement play towards the journalism that you undertake, especially when it comes to the art of storytelling as a part of greater social cohesion?
Well, the first thing I'd say is things precisely like this are the sort of thing we like to know who's in that community. And communities, particularly religious communities, tend not to trust journalists particularly because we've had, I suppose, there's complexity in religious sensitivity. I saw a report recently where somebody was describing the Baha'i faith as a Muslim heresy, and I thought, that's not going to win them over really, and they're not going to talk to you. If you say that sort of thing, that is like you've just given me, a Muslim position, and in fact a hardline Muslim position. You can't say those sorts of things, but you don't know that unless you know the community, unless you get into the community and talk to them. And the same thing goes for us wherever we can. We try to engage and go out. There's been a lot of push, as Monica, both speakers have actually said, there's been a lot of push in terms of money and time to almost tie journalists to their desk and their laptop. That's about it. And so far in religion, we have resisted that. We try to get out as much as we can, and particularly Compass, there's a space to engage with those communities. And we do things like I don't give a script to people because that's an editorial problem to do that. But I will often ring people and say, I've just described you like this in the lead-in. Is that okay? Or would you make any adaptation to that? And that's a very simple thing to do, And that sort of actually getting into the community, being invited, working with people, getting to know them has been quite key. But it also is that in our unit we choose people. Our unit is diverse. If you look at our diverse in terms of its beliefs, there's a Buddhist in it. There's an Anglican in it, there's a Catholic in it, there's a Muslim in it. If you keep going through it, you'll find them all over the place, and different types of Christians as well. And that's been quite a deliberate way to do it, so that there are different perspectives. And when you have editorial meetings, you've got those different perspectives feeding into it. There isn't a Baha'i currently, by the way, but...
Hindu?
Sorry?
Hindu?
No Hindu at the moment either, not in the religion unit itself. There are Hindus within the news division, but not in the religion unit itself. But again, I say to the communities, unless you've got people coming forward to do it, it's not going to happen, by the way, and I try to encourage people to engage. And we have had interns who are Hindu, by the way, but that's at a junior level, which are more, they're observing really more than anything else. So that's pretty much what I'd say. The other thing is the way our policies work. We are told to engage, that social cohesion is one of the duties of the ABC, that part of what we're supposed to do is reflect the country back to itself. And notwithstanding what we said about the diversity of reporters and that sort of thing, being able to do that effectively, there is in fact policy in place. And I think that contributes in part to why the ABC still gets a high level of recognition and trust from the public. It does still. That's still factual, that the public tend to trust the national broadcaster. And that's partly about policy. There's an attempt to increase diversity, but it's also about engagement. And it depends on which group you're actually talking about. Four Corners tends to engage very carefully. Background Briefing tends to engage very carefully. Tends to. That's different to daytime, local radio.
I'm going to jump.
I want to jump now to the concept of a shared narrative because the Australian Baha'i community, as many of you may know, is really thinking deeply about what makes for an inclusive narrative. And recently, as many people in the media profession would know, there was a 2019 digital news report, and in it, Darryl Karp, the director of the Museum of Australian Democracy, offered a commentary on trust, democracy, and a free press. And I was delighted to read when she wrote that a shared narrative is essential to the health of democracy. The importance of a shared narrative cannot be understated as a foundation stone for civic discourse and trust building. So, I'd love to hear what your contributions would be to this shared narrative, which would help to strengthen dialogue and build trust amongst the members of our society.
Do you want to go first?
Mm.
All right, okay. Okay. When you talk about shared narrative, there is scholars have basically talked about this imagination. What it says is that even if you go to the smallest country, you cannot know everyone there. So the only way we all come together is by imagining that we are one. We are part of Australia. And how does that sense of being a country comes up? How do you feel that yes, you're Australian? It's about, the way you live and the values that you have, or some of the shared experiences which come through the media, where media plays an important role because you have that shared experience. For example, when the apology was offered to, Indigenous Australians, we all were watching. We all shared that moment, and we were quite proud of it, whether we are new immigrants or we've been here for a long time. So that is the shared moment which media showed it to all of us. And because otherwise you wouldn't, how many people can fit into Canberra? Right? We shared it through the media. So in that sense, the media plays that role. And it provides us that shared memory and shared experiences. And that's where it's important.